The Texas sky stretched endless above Lone Star Ranch, painted in shades of amber as the sun descended toward the horizon. Travis McCord stood in the middle of his pasture, his weathered hands gripping a coiled rope, his gray cowboy hat casting shadows across features carved deep by 73 years of hard living. The checkered flannel shirt hung loose on shoulders that had once been broad and strong, now diminished by time and the quiet grief that had settled into his bones like winter cold. Before him stood Ranger, a chestnut gelding whose dark mane caught the golden light. The horse was 26 years old, his once powerful frame now lean and tired. Travis had raised Ranger from a foal, trained him, worked cattle alongside him for more than 2 decades. But everything changed 3 years ago when Betty Sue died. His wife of 48 years passed quietly in her sleep, leaving him alone in the ranch house they had built together. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Now, his daughter Mary Ellen wanted him to sell the ranch and move to Phoenix. He had finally agreed. It was time to let go. But first, he had to deal with Ranger. The horse was too old to sell, too old for anyone to want. The veterinarian had suggested, gently, that the kindest thing might be to let him go now, while he was still comfortable. Travis had agreed to schedule an appointment for the following week. But standing here in the fading light, watching Ranger's calm, knowing eyes, Travis felt something crack inside his chest. On the saddle still strapped to Ranger's back, something caught the light. A small photograph tucked into the leather near the horn. Travis frowned. He hadn't put that there. He stepped closer, his heart pounding, and pulled it free. The woman in the picture was young, with dark hair styled in the fashion of the 1940s. Her eyes were dark and deep, holding secrets the camera could only hint at. Travis had never seen this photograph before. Yet something about her face stirred a distant memory. His hands shook as he turned it over. On the back, written in faded ink, were 4 words that made his blood run cold: "She never forgot you." The pasture tilted around him. Ranger nickered softly, pressing his nose against Travis's shoulder. Who had placed this here? Who was this woman? Travis looked at Ranger and saw something in the horse's steady gaze he had missed before. Not just patience, but purpose. Whatever this was, Travis knew he couldn't leave. Not until he understood what Ranger was trying to tell him. Travis stood frozen in the dying light, the photograph trembling in his calloused hands. The woman's face stared back at him through the decades, her dark eyes seeming to hold answers to questions he didn't yet know how to ask. Ranger shifted beside him, the leather saddle creaking softly, as if urging him toward some truth that waited just beyond his understanding. Travis's mind raced backward through the years, searching for any memory of this woman, any fragment of recognition that might explain why her image had appeared now, in this moment, when he had been ready to walk away from everything. He turned toward the ranch house, his boots heavy against the dry Texas earth. The 2-story structure stood against the darkening sky, its white paint faded and peeling in places Betty Sue would have never allowed when she was alive. Inside those walls were 50 years of memories, boxes of photographs, letters, and documents he hadn't looked at since the funeral. If answers existed, they would be there. Travis glanced back at Ranger, who watched him with that same purposeful expression, then made his decision. Tomorrow's appointment with the veterinarian would have to wait. The house felt emptier than usual as Travis stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He moved through the kitchen where Betty Sue's apron still hung on its hook, past the living room where her reading glasses rested on the side table as if she might return at any moment to finish her book. He climbed the stairs to the attic, each step an effort that reminded him of his age, of all the years that had piled up like dust in forgotten corners. The attic was hot and close, filled with the smell of old wood and memories. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, each one labeled in Betty Sue's careful handwriting. Travis pulled the chain on the bare bulb overhead, and weak yellow light spilled across decades of accumulated life. He knew what he was looking for, though he couldn't have explained why. A box marked Travis, before, sat in the far corner, untouched since they had moved it here 30 years ago. His hands hesitated on the cardboard flaps. Opening this box felt like opening a door he had sealed shut long ago, back when he was young and full of secrets he thought were better left buried. But the woman in the photograph had reached across time to find him, and Ranger had made sure he couldn't ignore her. Travis opened the box, and the past came rushing back. Inside the box, yellowed envelopes lay stacked beneath faded newspaper clippings and old military patches. Travis's breath caught as he recognized his own handwriting on some of the letters, young and uncertain, addressed to people whose faces he could barely remember. He sifted through the contents carefully, his fingers brushing against fabric, paper, and time itself. Then, near the bottom, wrapped in a piece of cloth that had once been blue, he found what he didn't know he was looking for. Another photograph, identical to the one from Ranger's saddle. Travis lifted it into the light, and suddenly he was 22 years old again, standing in a train station in San Antonio in the spring of 1974. The woman's name came back to him like a whisper carried on wind: Elena. Elena Rodriguez. She had been a waitress at the diner near the bus depot, and he had been a young ranch hand passing through, running from a father who drank too much and a future that felt too small. They had shared 3 weeks together, 3 weeks that had felt like a lifetime, before Travis left for a job up north. He had promised to write. He had promised to come back. He never did either. Life had swept him forward, away from San Antonio and Elena, toward Betty Sue and the ranch and the family he built here. He had told himself that what he shared with Elena was just a young man's foolishness, a brief moment that didn't matter in the long run. But looking at her photograph now, seeing those dark eyes that had watched him with such hope and trust, Travis felt shame burn hot in his chest. She had mattered. She had mattered very much, and he had abandoned her without explanation. Beneath the photograph, Travis found an envelope he didn't recognize. It was addressed to him at the ranch, postmarked 15 years ago, but he had never seen it before. His hands shook as he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting elegant and precise. It began, "Dear Travis, you don't know me, but I am Elena's daughter. My mother passed away last month, and with her final breath, she spoke your name." The words blurred before his eyes. Elena had a daughter. Elena had died 15 years ago, and somehow this letter had never reached him. Travis read on, his heart hammering against his ribs. The daughter's name was Rosa. She had found the ranch's address among her mother's belongings, along with stories of a cowboy her mother never stopped loving. At the bottom of the letter was a phone number and an address in San Antonio. Travis's world tilted on its axis. Everything he thought he knew about his life suddenly felt incomplete, like a story missing its most important chapters. Travis sat on the attic floor, Rosa's letter clutched in his trembling hands, as the weight of 15 lost years pressed down upon him. The single bulb overhead flickered, casting dancing shadows across the boxes that surrounded him like silent witnesses to his shock. How had he never received this letter? He tried to remember that time, 15 years ago, when it would have arrived. Betty Sue had been sick then, recovering from pneumonia that had nearly taken her. The ranch had been struggling, and he had been consumed with worry and work, barely keeping his head above water. Betty Sue. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She must have found the letter first. Travis could picture it clearly now. His wife checking the mail as she always did, seeing the return address from San Antonio, perhaps even opening it out of concern or curiosity. She would have read about Elena, about a daughter who claimed Travis was her mother's great love. Betty Sue had never mentioned it, never confronted him, never asked about the woman from his past. She had simply hidden the letter away and carried that knowledge silently for the rest of her life. Travis's chest tightened with a complicated grief. Had Betty Sue been hurt? Angry? Or had she understood that the past was past, that whatever he had shared with Elena belonged to a different version of himself, before he became the man who loved her? He would never know now. That conversation was lost forever, buried with his wife in the cemetery on the hill. But one thing was certain. Betty Sue had known, and she had chosen to protect him from it, or perhaps to protect herself. He looked back at the letter, reading it again more carefully. Rosa wrote that Elena had never married, had raised her alone while working at the same diner where she had met Travis. She wrote that Elena kept a photograph of him beside her bed until the day she died, that she told Rosa stories of those 3 weeks in the spring of 1974 as if they were chapters from a sacred book. "My mother said you were the kindest man she ever knew," Rosa had written. "She said you had gentle hands and a good heart." Travis's throat constricted. He didn't feel like a man with a good heart. He felt like a coward who had run from something real because he was too young and too scared to recognize its value. Elena had loved him, truly loved him, and he had repaid that love with silence and absence. But now, somehow, through Ranger and these photographs, Elena was reaching out to him again. Or perhaps it was Rosa, trying to connect the threads of a story that had been left unfinished for too long. Travis descended the attic stairs with Rosa's letter pressed against his chest, his legs unsteady beneath him. The house felt different now, as if the walls themselves had shifted to accommodate this new truth that had taken root in his heart. He moved through the darkened hallway to his bedroom, where the old rotary phone sat on the nightstand beside the bed he had shared with Betty Sue. The clock read 9:30. Too late to call? Perhaps. But 15 years had already passed. He couldn't wait another day. His fingers dialed the number from the letter, each rotation of the dial feeling like a small eternity. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Travis nearly hung up, his courage faltering, when a woman's voice answered. "Hello." She sounded cautious, the way people do when strangers call after dark. Travis opened his mouth, but no words came. "How did you introduce yourself to the daughter of a woman you abandoned 50 years ago?" "Hello?" the voice repeated, more insistent now. "Is someone there?" Travis forced himself to speak. "Is this Rosa?" "Rosa Rodriguez." There was a long pause. "Yes." "Who is this?" Her accent carried the soft musical quality of South Texas, reminding him painfully of Elena. "This is Travis McCord," he said, his voice cracking. "You wrote me a letter 15 years ago. About your mother. About Elena." The silence that followed was so complete Travis thought she might have hung up. Then he heard her breath catch, a small sound of surprise or perhaps disbelief. "Mr. McCord," she whispered. "I never thought. I sent that letter so long ago. I thought you didn't want to respond. I thought maybe you had forgotten her completely." The pain in her words cut through him like a knife. "I never got the letter," Travis said quickly. "Not until tonight. I found it hidden away. Rosa, I'm so sorry. If I had known, I would have called immediately." "You really didn't know?" Rosa's voice trembled. "About my mother passing? About me?" Travis gripped the phone tighter. "No. I swear to you, I didn't know. But I need to understand something. The photograph. Someone put your mother's photograph on my horse's saddle today. Was that you?" Rosa's confusion was evident in her silence. "I don't understand. I've never been to your ranch. I wouldn't even know how to find it." Travis's mind raced. If Rosa hadn't placed the photograph, then who had? And how did they know about Elena? "Rosa," he said slowly, "I think we need to talk. There's something happening here that neither of us understands." 3 days later, Travis stood in the parking lot of a small cafe in San Antonio, his truck engine ticking as it cooled in the late morning heat. He had driven 4 hours through the Texas Hill Country, watching the landscape shift from the flat ranchland he knew to the rolling terrain that surrounded the city. His hands gripped the steering wheel long after he turned off the ignition, his heart hammering with a nervousness he hadn't felt in decades. Inside that cafe, Rosa was waiting, the daughter of the woman he had loved and left behind. He finally forced himself out of the truck and walked toward the entrance. Through the window, he could see her immediately. She sat at a corner table, a woman in her late 40s with dark hair pulled back from her face. Even from a distance, Travis could see Elena in her features, the same deep eyes, the same graceful way she held herself. Rosa looked up as the door chimed, and their eyes met. She stood slowly, her expression a mixture of hope and caution. "Mr. McCord?" she asked as he approached. Her voice was steadier than it had been on the phone, but Travis could see her hands trembling slightly. "Travis, please," he said, removing his hat. "I'm not much for formalities." They sat across from each other, two strangers bound by a ghost, and for a moment neither knew how to begin. Finally, Rosa reached into her purse and pulled out an old shoebox. "These were my mother's," she said quietly. "I thought you should see them." Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, each one addressed to Travis McCord in care of various ranches across Texas. None had ever been sent. Rosa watched as Travis unfolded one with shaking hands. Elena's handwriting filled the page, telling him about her day, about the diner, about the baby growing inside her. Travis's vision blurred. "She was pregnant," he whispered. Rosa nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your daughter, Travis. My mother never told you because she didn't want to trap you. She said you had dreams, and she wouldn't be the one to cage them." The cafe seemed to spin around him. All these years, he had a daughter. Elena had carried that secret alone, had raised Rosa alone, had loved him enough to let him go even when she carried his child. The magnitude of what he had missed crashed over him like a wave. Birthdays, first words, scraped knees, graduations. An entire life had unfolded without him. "Why now?" Travis managed to ask through the tightness in his throat. "Why reach out after all this time?" Rosa wiped her eyes. "Because before my mother died, she made me promise to find you. She said you deserved to know the truth, even if it came too late." Travis and Rosa sat in that cafe for hours, the lunch crowd coming and going around them as they pieced together a lifetime of missing moments. Rosa told him about growing up above the diner where Elena worked double shifts to keep them fed and clothed. She described her mother's gentle strength, the way she hummed while cooking breakfast, how she always kept that photograph of Travis on her dresser like a shrine to what might have been. Travis listened with his heart breaking, imagining Elena aging alone, raising their daughter with love but without the partner she deserved. Rosa showed him more photographs from the shoebox. Pictures of a little girl with dark braids and missing front teeth, a teenager in a graduation cap, a young woman on her wedding day. "That's my husband, Miguel," Rosa said, pointing to a kind-faced man beside her in the photo. "We have 2 sons, Gabriel and Thomas. They're in college now." Travis stared at the images, realizing he wasn't just discovering a daughter, but grandchildren too. An entire family tree had grown from those 3 weeks in 1974, and he had known nothing about it. "Did she ever speak badly of me?" Travis asked, needing to know. Rosa shook her head. "Never. She told me you were young, that you both were. She said she saw fear in your eyes when you talked about staying in one place, and she understood that some people need to run before they can learn to stand still. She loved you enough to let you find your own way." The grace in Elena's understanding made Travis feel even smaller. He had been a coward, and she had made excuses for him, had protected his memory even from their daughter. Rosa reached across the table and took his weathered hand in hers. "I'm not angry with you, Travis. I never was. My mother taught me that life is complicated, that people do the best they can with what they know. You didn't abandon us because you were cruel. You just didn't know we existed." Her forgiveness felt undeserved but necessary, like water in a desert. Travis gripped her hand tighter, feeling the warmth of connection he had never expected to find. "There's still something I don't understand," Travis said, remembering what had brought him here. "The photograph on Ranger's saddle. If you didn't put it there, who did?" Rosa's expression shifted, becoming thoughtful. "My mother had a sister, my Aunt Carmen. She still lives in the area. Maybe she knows something." Travis felt a chill run down his spine. Another piece of the puzzle was emerging, and he sensed they were only beginning to understand the full picture. Carmen Rodriguez lived in a small house on the east side of San Antonio, its yard filled with flowering plants and a statue of the Virgin Mary. Travis and Rosa stood at the front door, and before they could knock, it swung open. An elderly woman with silver hair and Elena's same dark eyes looked out at them. "I've been expecting you," Carmen said simply, gesturing them inside. Her voice carried a knowing quality that made Travis's skin prickle with anticipation. The living room was decorated with family photographs covering every surface. Carmen led them to a worn sofa and sat across from them in a rocking chair, her hands folded in her lap. "You want to know about the photograph," she said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Travis leaned forward. "It was you? You came to my ranch?" Carmen shook her head slowly. "No, Travis. I'm 82 years old. I don't travel anymore. But I know who did." She stood and retrieved a large envelope from a drawer in an old secretary desk. Inside were more photographs, these ones showing a young man in his 20s with Rosa's features and Elena's eyes. "This is my grandson, Daniel," Carmen explained. "Rosa's oldest son, Gabriel's brother. He passed away 2 years ago in a car accident." Rosa gasped, reaching for the photographs with trembling hands. Travis saw the pain flash across her face, a wound still raw and bleeding. Carmen continued, her voice soft but steady. "Before Daniel died, he became obsessed with finding you. He felt like there was a missing piece in our family story, something incomplete. He tracked you down, found your ranch, and he went there 3 months ago." Travis's mind reeled. 3 months ago, he had been deep in his grief, barely functioning, preparing to give up on everything. "He visited your ranch?" Carmen nodded. "He watched you from a distance. He saw you with Ranger, saw how you cared for that old horse. And he saw something else too." "What did he see?" Travis asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "He saw a man drowning in loneliness, a man who had lost his way. Daniel told me he wanted to help you, to give you a reason to keep going. So he placed Elena's photograph where you would find it, hoping it would lead you back to us." Travis felt his chest constrict with emotion. A grandson he never knew had tried to save him from beyond the grave, had seen his pain and offered him the gift of family. Travis drove back to Lone Star Ranch with Rosa beside him in the passenger seat. She had insisted on coming, saying she needed to see the place where her mother's photograph had been waiting all these years, the place where Daniel had walked in his final months. The Texas landscape rolled past the windows, golden fields stretching toward distant horizons, and Travis felt something shifting inside him. The emptiness that had consumed him since Betty Sue's death was still there, but now it shared space with something else. Purpose. Connection. A reason to keep breathing. When they arrived at the ranch, Ranger was standing by the fence as if he had been waiting. Rosa climbed out of the truck slowly, taking in the house, the barn, the pastures that sprawled in every direction. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "I can see why my mother thought you belonged to wide open spaces." Travis led her to Ranger, and the horse nickered softly, pressing his nose against Rosa's outstretched hand. "He knew," Travis said quietly. "Somehow, he knew what I needed to find." Rosa ran her fingers along the saddle where the photograph had been placed. Daniel loved animals. He would have appreciated Ranger. They stood together in the fading afternoon light, A father and daughter reunited by loss and love, by mistakes and miracles. Travis felt tears on his cheeks and didn't bother to wipe them away. For 3 years, he hadn't allowed himself to cry, had kept everything locked tight inside. Now, the dam had finally broken. "What will you do now?" Rosa asked. "Will you still sell the ranch and move to Phoenix?" Travis looked around at the land he had built a life upon, at the horse who had refused to let him give up, at the daughter who stood beside him like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known how to speak. "I don't know," he admitted. "Everything's different now. You're here. I have grandchildren I've never met. There's so much time to make up for." Rosa smiled, and in that smile Travis saw Elena's grace, her capacity for forgiveness, her belief in second chances. "You don't have to make up for anything," Rosa said gently. "We just have to move forward. Together, if you're willing." Travis pulled her into an embrace, this daughter he had missed a lifetime with, and felt something he thought had died with Betty Sue beginning to stir again in his chest. Hope. The future suddenly looked different, not like an ending but like a beginning. There were grandchildren to meet, stories to share, holidays to celebrate together. And there was Ranger, the old horse who had carried him through darkness back into light. 6 months later, Travis stood in the same pasture where he had found Elena's photograph, but everything had changed. The ranch was alive again with voices and laughter. Rosa's son Thomas had moved into the guest house to help manage the property, and Gabriel visited every other weekend with his wife and their baby daughter. The emptiness that had haunted these fields had been replaced with the sounds of family, of life continuing and renewing itself in ways Travis had never imagined possible. Ranger grazed peacefully nearby, his coat gleaming in the morning sun. The old horse had been given a reprieve, his final years now filled with gentle rides and the attention of grandchildren who brought him apples and carrots. Travis had canceled that appointment with the veterinarian, understanding now that Ranger's purpose hadn't been finished. The horse had saved him, had been the messenger that brought him back from the edge of despair into the warm embrace of a family he never knew existed. Mary Ellen had driven out from Phoenix last month, worried and confused by her father's sudden change of heart about selling the ranch. Travis had introduced her to Rosa, had watched his 2 daughters meet for the first time, had seen the initial shock give way to cautious acceptance and finally to genuine affection. They were sisters now, bound by his blood and his mistakes, choosing to build something new from the broken pieces of the past. On the mantel in the living room, Travis had placed 2 photographs side by side. One showed Betty Sue on their wedding day, radiant and full of joy. The other was Elena's photograph, the one that had started everything, her dark eyes still holding their secrets and their grace. He loved them both, these women who had shaped his life in different ways. Betty Sue had given him stability and partnership, a foundation to build upon. Elena had given him Rosa, and through her, a second chance at being the man he should have been all along. Travis walked over to Ranger and stroked the horse's neck, feeling the solid warmth of the animal beneath his palm. "Thank you, old friend," he whispered. "You knew what I needed before I did." Ranger turned his head, those calm, knowing eyes meeting Travis's, and Travis could have sworn the horse understood every word. The Texas sun climbed higher in the sky, spreading light across Lone Star Ranch. Travis McCord was 73 years old, and for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. The past had been painful and complicated, full of regrets and roads not taken. But the future stretched before him now, bright with possibility and filled with the faces of people who loved him despite his flaws. He had been given something rare and precious, a chance to make peace with yesterday while embracing tomorrow. And he would not waste it.